The living room in my parents' two-story house in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio seemed to close in on me as the rain lashed against the windows that evening. "Nicole, we have called this family meeting because we love you too much to let you continue down this path with hope," my mother announced, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and determination as she motioned for me to sit in the center chair. But as the hired counselor began to speak about the dangers of my choices and the family nodded in agreement, none of us could have predicted that the elderly woman with the gentle smile in the back, my 78-year-old grandmother Margaret, would be the one to stand up and defend the love I shared with Hope that they were trying so desperately to destroy with this so-called psychological intervention. It had been 2 years since I first met Hope at a community art workshop where she was teaching a class on digital illustration, and I was there as a high school English teacher looking for creative ways to engage my students. From the moment our eyes met across the room, there was an instant connection that went beyond friendship. We started seeing each other secretly at first because I knew my conservative Christian family would never approve. Hope was patient and understanding, always reminding me that our love was worth the risk. But secrets have a way of coming out, and when my sister Emily saw us holding hands at a local park one afternoon, everything changed. The family had been suspicious for months, noticing my late nights and the way I talked about my friend Hope. They organized this intervention with the help of their pastor, who recommended the counselor to help me see the light. As I sat there listening to my father quote Bible verses about the natural order, and my mother cry about how I was breaking her heart, I felt a storm of emotions inside. I loved my family deeply. They had sacrificed so much for my education and career as a teacher in the local district. Yet my heart belonged to Hope, the woman who made me feel alive and accepted for who I was. The counselor asked me to explain my feelings, and I tried to describe how Hope completed me, but the words felt heavy under their judgmental stares. Hope was waiting in the kitchen, not allowed in the main room at first, but I could hear her voice occasionally trying to reason with my brother. The pressure was building, and I wondered if I had the strength to stand my ground, or if the family ties would pull me back. My internal conflict was tearing me apart. On one side was the life I knew, safe and familiar, full of family gatherings and community respect as a respected educator. On the other was a future with hope, filled with love, but shadowed by potential isolation and criticism from society in our small conservative town. As the evening wore on, the family listed all the reasons why my relationship was wrong, citing friends who had changed after similar interventions and the social consequences for my job as a teacher. I felt the weight of their words like stones on my chest. Yet every time I thought of breaking up with Hope, a sharp pain shot through me. I remembered the first time we went on a real date to a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town where we talked for hours about our dreams. She wanted to open her own design studio, and I wanted to write a book one day. Those moments made everything feel possible. Now here in this room, the counselor was pushing me to admit that my feelings were a phase, a rebellion against my upbringing. My father paced the floor, his face red with frustration, saying things like, "God has a plan for you, Nicole, and this is not it." My mother wiped her tears and begged me to think of my future children. How could I deny them a normal family? Emily, my sister, sat quietly at first, but her eyes burned with what I later learned was betrayal, because she had been the one to push for this meeting after seeing us together. The air grew thicker with every accusation, and I could feel my resolve cracking under the combined force of their love twisted into control. Grandma Margaret sat in her usual armchair by the window, knitting quietly as if the storm around her did not touch her, but I caught her eyes once or twice, and there was a softness there, a quiet understanding that gave me a flicker of hope. The family kept circling back to how my relationship with Hope was harming the family name in our tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone and whispers traveled fast. They talked about how neighbors had already asked questions, and how it affected my father's business as a local contractor. I tried to defend myself, explaining that love was love, and that hope brought out the best in me, but they countered with stories of people who had left similar lifestyles and found peace in traditional paths. The counselor nodded along, suggesting exercises to rewire my thinking, and I felt trapped like a bird in a cage with the door closing slowly. Hope texted me from the kitchen asking if I was okay, and I wanted so badly to run to her, but the family had made it clear this was my moment to choose. The hours dragged on with more prayers and tears, and I began to question everything I thought I knew about myself. Was I selfish for wanting happiness on my own terms, or was this the price of being true to who I was? By the end of that first intense session, they had me isolated for a private talk with the counselor where he asked me to list the costs of staying with Hope and the benefits of letting go. I listed them in my head: the loss of family support, the judgment at work, the peace of mind my parents craved, but none of it outweighed the emptiness I knew I would feel without hope. The file ends as they called a short break for coffee, but the tension hung heavy, promising more confrontations ahead as the night was far from over and my choices were about to get even harder. As the family regrouped after the break, the living room lights seemed harsher, casting long shadows across the faces I had known my whole life. The counselor suggested we bring Hope into the circle now to hear her side, but my mother insisted that this was my intervention and Hope was the influence that needed to be addressed. I felt a surge of protectiveness for the woman I loved, the one who had held me through my doubts and celebrated my small victories as a teacher. Hope finally entered the room, her face calm but her eyes showing the strain of waiting through the raised voices. She sat beside me and took my hand under the table, a small act of defiance that sent ripples through the family. My sister Emily could not hold back any longer, and she blurted out that she had seen texts between us that left no doubt about the nature of our relationship. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow because Emily had always been my confidant, the one I thought understood me better than anyone. She had promised to keep my secret when I first confided in her months ago, but now here she was using it as ammunition in this family war. My internal turmoil deepened as I grappled with the realization that even those closest to me could turn against me when it came to this part of my identity. Hope spoke softly, explaining that our love was genuine, and not a choice but a truth we lived every day. She talked about how we supported each other through tough times, like when I faced burnout at school, and she helped me find balance with weekend hikes in the nearby state park. The family listened, but their responses were laced with prejudice, my father calling it unnatural, and my mother worrying about what the church would say if word got out. The counselor steered the conversation toward moral dilemmas, asking me if I was willing to risk my eternal soul for temporary happiness. Those words echoed in my mind, stirring up years of religious upbringing that had shaped my worldview. I loved my faith, but I could not reconcile it with the idea that God would condemn the joy I found with Hope. The pressure mounted as they threatened to cut financial support for my student loans if I did not end things immediately. As a teacher, my salary was modest, and the thought of losing that safety net made my stomach churn. Hope squeezed my hand tighter, her strength a quiet anchor while I wavered between loyalty to family and loyalty to love. Flashbacks flooded me of our first trip together to a cabin in the woods where we talked late into the night about our futures free from judgment. Those memories clashed with the current reality of my sister's cold stare and my parents' disappointed sighs. The family then turned on Hope, directly questioning her intentions and suggesting she was leading me astray. She responded with dignity, sharing how meeting me had given her purpose after a difficult past with her own family that had never fully accepted her artistic path. The room grew hotter with emotions as accusations flew, and I felt the weight of every decision pressing down. Would I sacrifice my relationship to keep the peace or stand firm and face the unknown? My grandmother Margaret remained silent through most of this, but I noticed her knitting needles pause more often, as if she was processing everything. The night stretched on with more rounds of arguments, and I began to see the cracks in my own resolve. The societal prejudice they spoke of was real. I had seen it in sideways glances at work and hushed conversations among colleagues. Yet in Hope's arms I had found a peace that no amount of family approval could replace. The counselor proposed a trial separation period where I would limit contact with Hope and focus on prayer and reflection. The idea terrified me because even a short time apart felt like losing a part of myself. Hope looked at me with eyes full of love and whispered that she would wait no matter what, but the choice had to be mine. That moment crystallized the moral conflict inside me, the pull between the daughter who wanted to make her parents proud and the woman who refused to deny her truth. As the session wound down, they agreed to resume in the morning, but the damage was done. My trust in my sister shattered and my doubts amplified. I lay awake that night in my old bedroom, listening to the rain, wondering if love was worth this much pain, or if the family was right that I needed saving from myself. The internal battles raged on, making sleep impossible as the cost of my choices became clearer with every passing hour. Morning light filtered through the curtains, bringing no relief from the tension that had built overnight in the house. The family gathered again, this time with fresh coffee and even more determination, as the counselor outlined steps for me to reclaim my life. I felt exhausted from the emotional marathon, but Hope's presence beside me gave me a spark of courage. They escalated the pressure by revealing that my school principal had been contacted anonymously about my personal life, raising the real threat of professional consequences in our conservative district, where teachers were expected to uphold traditional values. The moral dilemma hit harder now because my career was not just a job, it was my calling, the way I connected with students and helped them find their voices through literature. Losing that would mean losing a piece of who I was. Hope faced direct hostility as my brother accused her of manipulating me, and the room filled with voices overlapping in anger. I defended her fiercely, but my words felt weak against the wall of family unity. Inside, I questioned if I was being selfish for putting my happiness above theirs after all they had given me: a stable home and opportunities many others never had. The betrayal from Emily cut deepest when she admitted she had recorded some of our conversations to share with the counselor, showing just how far the family was willing to go to save me in their eyes. That revelation broke something in me. The trust that had defined our sisterhood now lay in pieces on the floor. Hope suggested we leave, but the family blocked the door, literally and figuratively, insisting this was for my own good. The tension reached new heights as my father threatened to disown me if I walked out without agreeing to end the relationship. The thought of losing my family entirely sent waves of panic through me, but Hope's steady gaze reminded me of the life we had built together: the quiet evenings in her apartment creating art and dreaming of a future where we could be open. The counselor pushed for a commitment for me to attend weekly sessions and limit contact with Hope for 30 days. I hesitated, knowing that such a promise would feel like a betrayal of the love that had become my foundation. Societal prejudice loomed large in their arguments, citing how same-sex relationships faced higher rates of challenges, and how my choice could affect future generations in our family line. I countered with the truth that love transcended those statistics, but they dismissed it as naive. As the day wore on, my internal conflict peaked. I imagined a life without Hope, empty and dutiful, versus a life with her, full, but lonely from family estrangement. The sacrifices felt immense, my career hanging by a thread, my family bonds fraying. Hope showed her strength by calmly stating that she would not force me, but she believed our love was worth fighting for. That statement gave me pause, forcing me to confront the reality that staying meant enduring more confrontations like this. The family then shared stories of other interventions that had succeeded, turning the room into a pressure cooker of expectations. I felt myself cracking under the weight, wondering if perhaps they were right, and my feelings were a temporary confusion. Yet deep down, the thought of hurting Hope, the woman who had seen me at my lowest and loved me anyway, was unbearable. Grandma Margaret finally spoke a few words during a lull, asking everyone to take a breath, but her voice was soft and overlooked in the chaos. The afternoon brought more intense exchanges, with my mother breaking down in tears, begging me to choose the family path. Her pain mirrored my own, creating a cycle of guilt that threatened to drown me. By evening, the family demanded an answer, and I asked for one more night to think, knowing that the decision would define not just my relationship, but my entire sense of self. The betrayal and pressure had pushed me to a breaking point where every choice seemed to carry a devastating cost. Hope and I stole a moment alone in the hallway where she held me, and we whispered promises of resilience, but the weight of the day left me drained and uncertain. The night ahead promised more reflection as the intervention showed no signs of ending, and the stakes grew higher with each passing hour. The third day of the intervention dawned with a heavy silence in the house, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath for my decision. The family had invited more relatives, including my uncle, who echoed the same concerns about tradition and community standing. I sat through another round of talks, my mind a whirlwind of doubt and love. Considering a sacrifice, I thought about breaking up with Hope to preserve my family ties and career, but the idea felt like ripping out my own heart. The counselor encouraged me to write a letter to Hope explaining my choice, but the words would not come because every sentence felt like a lie. Hope remained strong through it all, facing the family's barbs with quiet dignity that only made me love her more. The betrayal deepened when Emily confessed she had been the one to contact the school anonymously out of what she called concern for my soul. That act shattered the last remnants of our sisterly bond, leaving me feeling utterly alone in the room full of people who claimed to love me. My internal struggle intensified as I weighed the moral cost of staying true to myself versus the pain I would cause by walking away from everything familiar. The family used Grandma Margaret as a prop, asking her to talk sense into me, but she only smiled sadly and said little at first. I considered the full weight of my choices: the loss of Sunday dinners, the judgment from neighbors, the potential end of my teaching job that I had worked so hard to build. Hope suggested we could move away, start fresh in a more accepting city. But that meant leaving behind the only home I had ever known. The confrontation reached a fever pitch when my father raised his voice, demanding I choose right then and there. The room spun with emotions, and I felt on the verge of collapse. In that moment of crisis, I saw Grandma Margaret shift in her chair, her eyes sharpening with a resolve I had never seen. The family continued their push, but something in her expression hinted that the tide was about to turn. The sacrifices I contemplated felt more real than ever as I imagined a future without the support system that had defined my life. Yet Hope's unwavering support reminded me that true family was not always blood. The moral dilemmas piled up one after another, forcing me to question what kind of person I wanted to be. As the day progressed, the family grew frustrated with my silence and turned their attention to Hope again, accusing her of being the root of all problems. She defended our love with stories of our shared laughter and mutual growth, but they dismissed it as delusion. My grandmother watched it all, her knitting now set aside, as if she was preparing to speak. The pressure on me to sacrifice my happiness for peace became almost unbearable, leading to a private moment where I broke down in the bathroom, questioning everything. Hope found me there, and we held each other in silence, knowing the next hours could change everything. The family called us back for another session, but the atmosphere had shifted subtly, with Grandma Margaret's quiet presence now feeling like a gathering storm. The betrayals and dilemmas had brought me to the edge, and I knew a decision was imminent, but the cost of either path loomed large. As the family circled for what they hoped would be the final push, the air crackled with expectation, and Grandma Margaret rose slowly from her chair, her frail frame suddenly seeming taller. "Enough," she said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the noise like a knife. The room fell silent as she stepped forward, her eyes meeting mine with a depth that spoke of years of hidden pain. "I have stayed quiet long enough," she began, "but I will not watch my granddaughter lose the love that gives her life meaning." The family stared in shock as she revealed her own past of forbidden love from the 1950s, when she was a young woman working in a factory, and fell for her best friend, a woman named Clara. "We kept it secret for years," she said, her voice trembling but full of fire, "because society and family would not allow it. I chose safety over truth, and I have regretted it every day since Clara died alone, and I married your grandfather out of duty." That confession shook the room to its core as Grandma Margaret passionately defended me and Hope, arguing that love was not a sin but a gift, and that forcing someone to deny it was the real moral failing. She confronted my parents directly, telling them that their intervention was not love but control born of fear and prejudice. The family erupted in protests, but she stood firm, sharing more details of her suppressed life, the nights she cried alone, the opportunities lost, the awakening that came too late. Her words resonated deep within me, awakening a strength I did not know I had. The climax built as she demanded they stop the pressure and accept me as I was or risk losing me forever. Hope and I stood together hand in hand as Grandma Margaret became our fiercest protector, turning the intervention on its head. My mother wept not from anger but from confusion as the foundations of their beliefs cracked. The family was divided, some clinging to their views, others beginning to listen. Grandma Margaret turned to me and said, "Nicole, choose your heart, because I never did, and the price was a lifetime of what-ifs." Her stand brought tears to my eyes and a wave of relief as the moral weight lifted slightly. The confrontation peaked with heated exchanges, but her courage inspired me to speak my truth without apology. The family reeled from the revelation as Grandma Margaret shared how she had watched me and Hope and seen the same genuine bond she had lost. This was the turning point where awakening spread through the room, forcing everyone to confront their own biases. The costs remained real, but Grandma Margaret's bravery gave us the space to breathe and decide without immediate ultimatums. As the evening ended, the family sat in stunned silence, processing the shift, and I felt a new resolve forming inside me. In the days that followed Grandma Margaret's stand, the family fractured along new lines, with some members reaching out tentatively, while others held firm in their disapproval. I chose to stay, with Hope, our bond stronger after the fire of the intervention. But the price was high: strained family dinners and whispers in the community that affected my teaching role, forcing me to consider a move to a different district. The sacrifices included lost invitations to family events and the emotional toll of knowing I had disappointed those who raised me. Yet the awakening brought clarity. I understood that love demanded courage and truth even when it hurt. Hope and I rebuilt in small ways, planning a future that honored both our hearts and the lessons learned. Grandma Margaret became a regular visitor to our apartment, sharing stories of her past and encouraging us to live openly. The family slowly showed signs of change, with my mother calling one evening to say she was trying to understand, though it would take time. The rifts remained, but healing began in unexpected places. Nicole and I grew through the ordeal, learning the value of boundaries and self-worth. As life settled into a new normal, I reflected on the journey, the confrontations, the betrayals, the painful choices, and the ultimate triumph of authenticity. The intervention that was meant to divide us had instead revealed the power of unexpected allies, and the cost of living a lie. Through it all, we paid dearly in relationships and peace of mind, but gained a deeper appreciation for the love that survived. The experience taught me that family is not always defined by blood, but by those who stand with you in truth. As I look back at the decisions made and the prices paid, one question lingers for everyone involved. When family demands you choose between blood and love, is standing by your heart an act of courage or selfish betrayal?